Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you tonight about something powerful, something that changes the game when you finally understand it. He thought you'd chase him. He really did. He thought you'd call one more time, explain yourself one more time, lower your standards one more time, and beg him to see your worth. He thought you'd stay right there, waiting, hoping, adjusting, shrinking yourself just enough to fit into his comfort zone. But instead of chasing him, you disappeared. And that, right there, is where everything shifted. Let me tell you something real tonight, something a lot of people don't want to hear, but need to understand. He thought you'd chase him. He truly believed you would keep running behind him, keep calling, keep checking, keep proving that you were worthy of the bare minimum he was giving. He believed that because for a long time you did. You showed up with your heart open. You made excuses for his silence. You explained his behavior to yourself when he wouldn't explain it to you. You stayed loyal even when consistency was missing. And in his mind, that meant you weren't going anywhere. See, when someone gets too comfortable, effort disappears. Respect fades. Appreciation turns into entitlement. He started thinking your love was guaranteed, like it was something he could put on pause and pick back up whenever it suited him. He thought you'd chase him because he underestimated the strength it takes to walk away from someone you care about. He mistook your patience for weakness and your kindness for dependency. But what he didn't see coming was the moment you got tired of feeling confused, tired of wondering where you stood, tired of giving more than you were receiving. There comes a point when your heart and your mind finally get on the same page. And when that happens, everything changes. You didn't disappear overnight. It was a slow realization, a quiet decision, a moment of clarity where you said to yourself, I can't keep abandoning myself to keep someone else comfortable. And when you stopped chasing, when you stopped reaching out, when you stopped explaining your worth, that's when the silence hit him. Your absence became loud. Because now there was no one checking in, no one holding space, no one covering the gaps he left behind. He thought you'd chase him, but instead you chose yourself, and that decision shook him more than any argument ever could. See, chasing keeps you stuck. It keeps you focused on proving something to someone who's already decided how much effort they're willing to give. But disappearing shifts the power. It forces people to face the consequences of their behavior. It makes them reflect. And whether he realizes it today or years from now, the truth is the same. Losing someone who genuinely cared is a loss that lingers. You didn't disappear to play games. You didn't disappear to make him regret anything. You disappeared because you finally understood your value. You realized that love is not supposed to feel like anxiety, and connection is not supposed to feel like a constant struggle. You understood that the right person will never make you feel like you're asking for too much when you're simply asking for honesty, effort, and respect. And here's the part people don't talk about enough. When you stop chasing, you start healing. You start getting your energy back. You start sleeping better. You start thinking clearer. You begin to recognize how much you gave and how little you were asking for in return. Disappearing wasn't running away. It was returning to yourself. He thought you'd chase him, but he didn't realize you were growing. Growing into someone who no longer begs for attention, no longer settles for half love, and no longer stays where they're not valued. And once you reach that level of self-awareness, you don't go backwards. You don't explain yourself to people who already showed you who they are. You move forward quietly, confidently, and with your dignity intact. Let me take you deeper into this truth, because this is where growth really begins. He thought you'd chase him, not because you lacked value, but because he was used to being chased. He was used to people bending, adjusting, and settling just to keep him comfortable. He was used to knowing that no matter how distant he became, you would still be there holding the door open, waiting for him to decide if you were worth choosing. And for a while, that assumption worked because your heart was genuine and your intentions were pure. You gave patience where there should have been effort. You gave understanding where there should have been accountability. You gave loyalty where there should have been consistency. And in doing that, you slowly began to put his needs ahead of your own. Not because you didn't matter, but because you believed love meant sacrifice. What no one tells you is that love should never require you to abandon yourself. Love should add to your life, not drain the life out of you. At some point, something shifted inside you. You started noticing how quiet your phone was when you stopped reaching out first. You noticed how little he did when you stopped over giving. And that realization was painful, but it was necessary because clarity often comes wrapped in disappointment. You finally saw that you were carrying the connection on your back while he was simply enjoying the ride. And that's when the chasing stopped. When you disappeared, it wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement. No long message explaining your feelings for the 100th time. There was just silence, distance, space. And that silence did what words never could. It forced him to sit with himself. It forced him to feel the absence of your care, your attention, your presence. He thought you'd chase him, but he didn't understand that walking away takes more strength than staying. Disappearing is not weakness. It's discipline. It's knowing when to remove yourself from situations that no longer respect your worth. It's choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over familiarity. You didn't disappear because you stopped caring. You disappeared because you started caring about yourself more. And that shift changes everything. See, when you chase someone, you teach them that they can do the bare minimum and still keep you. But when you stop, you teach them that access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. Your absence became a mirror reflecting his behavior back to him. Whether he chose to grow from that reflection or not was never your responsibility. As you moved on, you began to rediscover parts of yourself that were lost in trying to make it work. Your confidence came back. Your laughter returned. Your energy no longer felt heavy. You realized how much lighter life feels when you're not constantly questioning your value. Disappearing gave you space to heal, and healing gave you clarity. And here's the truth that changes lives. Anyone who truly values you will never put themselves in a position to lose you. They won't play games with your emotions. They won't make you feel like you have to compete for their attention. They won't require you to chase them to be seen. The right person meets you halfway every time. He thought you'd chase him, but what he didn't see was you outgrowing him. Outgrowing the confusion, the inconsistency, the emotional uncertainty. And once you outgrow a situation, there's no going back. You don't need closure from someone who couldn't show up for you. Your closure came the moment you chose yourself and walked away with your head held high. Let me speak to the heart for a moment, because this is about more than walking away. It's about waking up. He thought you'd chase him because he was confident in your attachment, not your weakness. He knew you cared deeply. He knew you were invested. He knew you saw potential and believed in giving chances. And instead of honoring that, he leaned back and let you do the work. He let your effort fill the gaps where his should have been. Over time, chasing became your role, and choosing became his option. You waited through silence, telling yourself he was busy. You accepted inconsistency, calling it timing. You lowered your expectations, convincing yourself you were being understanding. Little by little, you started adjusting who you were so the connection wouldn't fall apart. And that's the danger of chasing someone who isn't meeting you halfway. You don't just lose them, you start losing yourself. The moment you stopped chasing didn't come from anger. It came from exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion is quiet. It shows up when you're tired of explaining the same feelings, tired of hoping tomorrow will be different, tired of pretending you're okay with things that don't sit right in your spirit. One day you just realize that love shouldn't feel like survival. And that realization changes you. When you disappeared, it wasn't to prove a point. It was because you finally understood that your presence had value. You realized that if someone can watch you pull away and do nothing, then they were never afraid of losing you. And that truth hurts, but it also frees you. Because now you're no longer guessing where you stand. Your absence did something powerful. It removed the comfort he had in knowing you'd always be there. It took away the emotional safety net he relied on while giving you uncertainty in return. He thought you'd chase him, but he didn't expect the silence. He didn't expect the boundaries. He didn't expect you to choose dignity over attachment. And here's what happens when you disappear for the right reasons. You stop reacting. You stop checking. You stop waiting. You reclaim your energy. You begin to see how much emotional labor you were carrying. You realize that real connection doesn't require constant reassurance or one-sided effort. Real love feels secure, not stressful. As you stepped back, you started growing. You started seeing things clearly instead of emotionally. You noticed patterns you once ignored. You recognized how often you gave understanding without receiving it. And that clarity didn't make you bitter, it made you stronger. Strong enough to say no to what doesn't serve you. He thought you'd chase him because people often confuse availability with value. But once you removed your availability, your value became undeniable. Your silence became self-respect. Your distance became protection. And whether he ever admits it or not, losing someone who truly cared leaves a mark. Disappearing doesn't mean you vanished. It means you redirected your focus. You stopped pouring into someone who wasn't pouring back. You started investing in your peace, your healing, your future. And once you taste that level of self-respect, you don't return to chasing what made you feel small. This is the lesson. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. You don't have to chase consistency, clarity, or commitment. The right person shows up without being asked. He thought you'd chase him, but instead you chose yourself, and that choice changed everything. Let me slow this down and really talk to your spirit, because this message is for anyone who ever gave too much to someone who gave too little. He thought you'd chase him because he got used to your effort. He got comfortable with your availability, your patience, your willingness to understand things that never quite made sense. He watched you show up even when he didn't. He saw you try to fix what he refused to address. And instead of meeting you at your level, he leaned back and let you do all the running. You see, chasing doesn't always look desperate. Sometimes it looks like loyalty. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it looks like giving someone the benefit of the doubt over and over again. You told yourself he just needed time. You told yourself everyone has flaws. You told yourself that if you loved harder, communicated better, waited longer, things would eventually change. But what you were really doing was teaching him that your presence had no conditions. The danger in that is subtle. When someone believes you'll always be there, they stop fearing loss. And when there's no fear of loss, there's no urgency to grow, no motivation to improve, no reason to choose you intentionally. He thought you'd chase him because history told him you would. Every time he pulled away and you leaned in, the pattern got stronger. Every time you accepted less than you deserved, the standard dropped. But there comes a moment when something inside you wakes up. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You start realizing how tired you are, tired of waiting, tired of wondering, tired of carrying conversations, emotions, and expectations alone. You notice how your energy feels drained instead of fulfilled. You notice how you're always adjusting while he stays exactly the same. And in that moment, you begin to understand that love shouldn't cost you your peace. When you disappeared, it wasn't dramatic. There was no speech, no final argument, no long message explaining your feelings one last time. It was quiet. It was intentional. You simply stopped chasing. You stopped initiating. You stopped filling in the silence. And that quiet decision carried more power than any words you ever said. Your absence changed the dynamic. Suddenly, there was no one smoothing things over. No one making excuses. No one holding emotional space for him while getting nothing in return. He felt the gap you left behind because what you gave was consistent, real, and rare. He thought you'd chase him, but he didn't realize how much he depended on your presence to feel secure. Disappearing wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. Respect for your time. Respect for your energy. Respect for your own heart. You finally understood that staying where you're not valued slowly teaches you to devalue yourself. So you chose distance not to hurt him, but to heal yourself. And something powerful happens when you stop chasing. You start seeing clearly. You stop romanticizing potential and start paying attention to behavior. You stop listening to promises and start watching patterns. You realize how often you settle for inconsistency just to avoid letting go. And with that realization comes growth. You began to feel lighter, calmer, more grounded. You started pouring that energy back into yourself instead of into someone who couldn't meet you halfway. You laughed more. You slept better. You stopped questioning your worth. And the more you healed, the more obvious it became that disappearing wasn't a loss, it was a breakthrough. He thought you'd chase him because he never imagined you would choose yourself. He didn't expect boundaries. He didn't expect silence. He didn't expect you to walk away with dignity instead of desperation. And whether he ever admits it or not, losing access to someone who genuinely cared leaves a lasting impact. Here's the truth. Anyone who truly values you will never put themselves in a position to lose you. They won't gamble with your feelings. They won't leave you confused. They won't require you to prove your worth through chasing. Real love meets you with effort, clarity, and consistency. You didn't disappear because you weren't strong enough to stay. You disappeared because you were finally strong enough to leave. You chose self-respect over familiarity, peace over chaos, and growth over attachment. And once you make that choice, you don't go back. You move forward knowing that the right people will never need to be chased because they'll already be walking beside you. Let me tell you something that changes everything once you finally see it clearly. He thought you'd chase him because he got used to being the priority while treating you like an option. He got comfortable watching you give more, care more, and try harder while he stayed exactly where he was. He saw your loyalty, your patience, your willingness to understand, and instead of respecting it, he relied on it. He assumed that no matter how distant he became, you'd still be there, holding the connection together by yourself. Chasing doesn't always look like desperation. Sometimes it looks like checking in first. Sometimes it looks like waiting a little longer. Sometimes it looks like making excuses for someone's behavior because you don't want to lose what you hoped it could become. You kept believing that if you stayed consistent, he would eventually match your energy. You believed effort would inspire effort. But what it really did was teach him that you would stay even when your needs weren't being met. Over time, you started normalizing things that shouldn't be normal. Silence felt familiar. Uncertainty felt routine. You learned how to live with unanswered questions and unkept promises. You convinced yourself that love meant patience, even when patience was costing you your peace. And the more you adjusted, the more invisible you felt. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were giving too much to someone who wasn't giving back. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, in moments when you realized how tired you were. Tired of initiating everything. Tired of wondering where you stood. Tired of feeling like you had to earn basic effort. Emotional exhaustion doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up when your heart feels heavy for no clear reason, when you're drained instead of inspired, when loving someone starts to feel like work instead of joy. And then one day, something clicked. You realize that chasing someone who isn't choosing you is a form of self-abandonment. You saw that every time you ran after him, you were running away from yourself. That awareness didn't make you angry, it made you honest. Honest enough to admit that staying was hurting you more than leaving ever could. When you disappeared, it wasn't to make a statement. It wasn't to teach him a lesson. It was a decision rooted in self-respect. You stopped reaching out. You stopped filling in the silence. You stopped explaining how you wanted to be treated. And that silence spoke volumes. Because for the first time, he had to sit with the absence of someone who genuinely cared. Your disappearance changed the balance. The comfort he had in knowing you'd always be there was gone. The safety net of your patience and understanding disappeared. He thought you'd chase him, but he didn't realize how much he depended on your presence to feel secure. Losing access to your energy forced him to confront something he'd avoided for a long time: accountability. But here's the truth. Whether he reflected or not was never your responsibility. Disappearing wasn't about him, it was about you. It was about choosing peace over confusion. It was about setting boundaries where there were none. It was about finally believing that love shouldn't feel like anxiety and connection shouldn't feel like uncertainty. As you stepped back, you started seeing clearly. You noticed patterns instead of promises. You saw how often his words didn't match his actions. You realized how much you had been holding together on your own, and instead of blaming yourself, you gave yourself grace. You understood that caring deeply was never the problem. Giving deeply to the wrong person was. Something powerful happens when you stop chasing. You get your energy back. You start focusing on your growth instead of their potential. You reconnect with the parts of yourself that got quiet while you were trying to keep someone else comfortable. You stop questioning your worth and start honoring it. And the more grounded you become, the less appealing inconsistency feels. He thought you'd chase him because he never imagined you would choose yourself. He underestimated your strength because he only saw your patience. He didn't realize that the same heart that stayed for so long was also strong enough to walk away once it understood its value. And once that realization happens, there's no going back. You didn't disappear because you stopped caring. You disappeared because you learned that caring for yourself matters too. You chose dignity over attachment, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over familiarity. And when you make that choice, you stop chasing people who don't choose you because you finally understand that the right ones never need to be chased at all. Let me take you all the way into this, because this is not just about walking away. This is about transformation. He thought you'd chase him because he got comfortable with your consistency. He got used to your presence, your patience, your emotional availability. He watched you show up again and again, even when he gave you mixed signals, even when he made you question where you stood. And instead of honoring that kind of commitment, he assumed it was permanent. He assumed you would always be there, filling in the gaps, making excuses, holding things together while he stayed emotionally distant. You see, chasing doesn't always look like running after someone. Sometimes it looks like staying silent about what hurts you. Sometimes it looks like understanding behavior that doesn't deserve understanding. Sometimes it looks like waiting, hoping, and believing that if you just give it a little more time, things will change. You told yourself he had potential. You told yourself no one is perfect. You told yourself love takes patience. And while all of that may be true, what you didn't realize was that you were slowly teaching him how to treat you. Every time he pulled away and you leaned in, the imbalance grew. Every time he gave less and you compensated by giving more, the standard dropped. He thought you'd chase him because history showed him you always would. Not because you were weak, but because you were loyal. And loyalty, when given to the wrong person, can be taken for granted instead of treasured. The hardest part about this kind of situation is that the breaking point doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives quietly. It shows up as exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind that settles in your chest when you're tired of asking the same questions, tired of feeling uncertain, tired of explaining your needs over and over again. You start noticing how often you feel anxious instead of secure. You start realizing that love shouldn't make you feel this heavy. And that awareness changes you. When you disappeared, it wasn't impulsive. It wasn't fueled by anger. It was thoughtful, intentional. You simply stopped chasing. You stopped initiating conversations. You stopped checking in. You stopped filling the silence that he created. And in that quiet decision, you reclaimed something powerful, your self-respect. Your absence did something words never could. It removed the comfort he had in knowing you'd always be there. It forced him to face the space you once filled so effortlessly. He thought you'd chase him, but he didn't expect the silence. He didn't expect you to choose dignity over attachment. He didn't expect you to realize that staying was costing you more than leaving ever would. Disappearing isn't about punishment. It's about protection. It's about understanding that staying in situations where you're undervalued slowly teaches you to undervalue yourself. You didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because you started caring about yourself. And that shift is one of the most powerful things a person can do. As you pulled back, clarity replaced confusion. You started seeing patterns instead of promises. You noticed how often his actions didn't match his words. You realized how much emotional labor you had been carrying alone. And instead of blaming yourself for caring too much, you finally understood that caring deeply was never the problem. The problem was giving that depth to someone who couldn't meet you there. Something incredible happens when you stop chasing. Your energy returns. Your mind gets quieter. Your heart feels lighter. You stop waiting for messages that never come and start focusing on your own growth. You reconnect with the parts of yourself that went quiet while you were trying to keep someone else comfortable. You remember who you were before you started questioning your worth. He thought you'd chase him because he never imagined you would choose yourself. He mistook your patience for permanence. He didn't realize that the same heart that stayed through uncertainty was also strong enough to walk away once it recognized its value. Losing access to someone who genuinely cared has a way of revealing truths people try to ignore. Whether he reflects, grows, or stays the same is no longer your concern. Your responsibility was never to teach someone how to value you. Your responsibility was to honor yourself when they couldn't. And by disappearing, you did exactly that. You chose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, self-respect over familiarity. This is the power in not chasing. You stop begging for effort and start expecting it. You stop explaining your worth and start living it. You understand that real love doesn't require pursuit, pressure, or persuasion. Real love shows up willingly, consistently, and clearly. He thought you'd chase him, but instead you elevated, you healed, you grew. You became someone who no longer settles for half effort or half love. And once you reach that level of awareness, you don't go back. You move forward with confidence, knowing that the right people will never need to be chased because they will already be choosing you every step of the way.